Mixing with my plugin of the week comes from Kazrog. It's the MHB Green. MHB stands for Michael H. Brower, and this is his own very unique compressor made by a company called AWA in Australia. They're a company that makes a lot of consumer radio electronics, or did back in the 1940s through the 1960s. And they made a couple of, I don't know what you call limiting amplifiers, which were basically like broadcast limiters. This was a unique one, though. They did have a model that apparently was quite popular down there. There were a bunch of versions of it, but there was this one particular one that was rumored to exist. Michael Brower managed to find it, and he managed to pry it from the hands of someone in Australia who actually had ownership of it. It's a very unique compressor, has a unique saturation type of sound to it, and some unique characteristics. He did some modifications, I believe, to it, adding in attack and release settings where you could actually have dialed in controls. Otherwise, everything would operate by normal presets. We'll kind of go through the user interface here and go over it. But basically, he got it, threw it in on a Coldplay record on the vocal, loved the sound of it, and I guess it's been a part of his workflow ever since. So let's dive in a little bit. It's your kind of, in many ways, sort of a standard limiter or compressor. Used to call them limiters back in that day. Threshold control, as you would expect. There's an output gain control here. The attack and release, as I said, was added in. There were preset attack and release settings here that you can go to. You know, I guess somewhat like on a Fairchild where you got the different time constants that you can switch into there. And this is just a test circuit. This knob doesn't actually work with anything, but, you know, it's there just for being accurate to the original graphic interface. When you have the limiter switch set to manual, it engages these, which gives you attack settings all the way up to 200 milliseconds. You could see down here. I believe it goes to, is it less than 1 millisecond? I thought it was a millisecond all the way up to 200 milliseconds. They say that the numbers here are accurate as opposed to the ones that are scripted on the actual controls. Release time, I believe, as I understood it, it was, I guess, from 10 milliseconds, that's what it is, up to 1 second on the release time. So you have some variation there, and that actually helps quite a lot. The level control, as I said, is an output gain control. Now, when I ran this through the plugin doctor, it was giving me all kinds of wacky EQ settings, because what you'll hear with the sound is a bit of a dip in the mid-range, or a pretty pronounced dip in the mid-range, and boost of high and low-mid frequencies. And so I ran it through there just to kind of see what it was. But as I was going through the different gain stages, it was giving me all kinds of crazy different shapes. So I'm not sure if that's just an issue with the plugin doctor or whether there's a little bit of something going on, because as I was adjusting the output level, I was hearing differences. Sometimes you could be fooled just by, you know, level, which is like a most obvious one, but I think there's a little bit of something going on there too. Could be wrong. But the differences were so dramatic in plugin doctor, it doesn't make sense. If you crank up this control here, what you'll get is a saturation. It's output compensated, so as you drive this gain upward, you'll get saturation. It drives through, and it's auto compensated on the output. If you hit the little MHR thing here, you open up what they call the back panel. This would give you the ability to link input-output gain controls, right? So that may be a quick way of just sort of setting and getting some gain reduction running through. It also affects the saturation as you're going through. There's a wet-dry control, which is very handy, and there's a warmth control. Now, the warmth control adjusts what they call the box tone to give a more mid-range focus. So as you drive this upward, you'll get more of a mid-range tone. As you pull this backward, it will give you a little bit more of a scoop in the mids and more pronounced highs in particular. There's an on-off switch, which you click on it. So that's a hard bypass that's also delay compensated, so you won't get that delay compensation when you A/B it in and out. And there's another unique feature here called analog entropy. This is actually now part of the Kazrog collection, and You could get to it here on the power knob, but you drive it up, which creates variation between the left and right on a stereo instance. So this will give you some variation, so you can make the two sides identical. It defaults to somewhere in the middle here, like around 54 or something like that was what the default was. That will also show up here in the settings. So as you go here to the settings, you can actually select the quality of the sound as it starts, and then what the offline is. This wasn't adjustable, so I'm not sure. Maybe they have to be different, or when it goes best, it automatically does best. I'm not exactly sure there. This is where you could set the analog entropy here for it. So that's another place to do it other than there. And then you got tooltips if you need tooltips and all of that sort of stuff. Now this is designed to be, as they describe it, is fairly light on the CPU. So it's not a big drain on the CPU in terms of what it does. So it's meant to sound good. It's meant to be something that you could put on a single track, on all the tracks. I have it here on the stem returns or bus returns here for the different track groupings, so we can kind of get like an overall vibe from it. And so let's have a listen. Let's just do a quick A/B and then kind of dive into some of the settings, play around with it here. I will call up, I don't know, let's call up the vocal one here. We can kind of dive, or maybe the drums. We'll kind of dive into that. We can kind of dig into some more stuff here. All right, let's have a listen. Here we go.
And my first impressions that are falling out of place. Instead of shifting gears, you'd rather leave than save face. Live a life of opposites, you can't play the same game. I don't understand what's going on, but we can't get back in line. I wanna make you cry, so I survive. Life no longer ordinary, taking sides with playing God with both. Drown my past to lose some future, take out blank space and build a home. Heaven sends you, heaven again.
All right, so you can hear how much presence that it adds around in that dip in the mid, so it kind of adds a lot of excitement. And I'm throwing in quite a bit of saturation here. Let's start. I started with the drums only because I could kind of show off a little bit more of the saturation component here. So let me just make a copy of this. Go to the B setting here, and let's drive this. Now, what's interesting is that I had kind of found that what I was doing here naturally was kind of setting my makeup gain on the output and then compensating for it here. Now, as I understand it, this will also drive some saturation. So that is a component part of this whole process. So I think you can also drive this, and then it has the output gain, I think down to like, 24 dB. So you can actually drive it to get even more saturation and then use the output gain after a digital output gain to kind of make up for that. In this case, it kind of drives the cymbals a bit, too much, makes them a little bit too fuzzy. But just to kind of give like an overall idea, this is where I started with it. Now, I could use the warmth control here to maybe, let's see if I can kind of cut a little bit of what's going on with the cymbals on the top there. right? And so for this, I have like the fastest attack time and a fast release time. So I just wanted it to really kind of pump and breathe here. So this is on the manual setting. I could kind of just quickly dial through some of the other ones. This is the fastest release, which looks like it's 250 milliseconds. You could also run it through just the amp electronics. I'm going to kind of go back to where I was because this is probably not the best example. Maybe with the vocal, we can kind of dial that in a little better. And then also there's the analog entropy here. So anyway, so I can get a bit of that kind of parallel energy in there. And then this is the analog entropy. Right now it's set to 0. So this will give us the strongest center image, but I can create some width here too, which probably works better with individual sounds. Adds more depth to the reverb for sure. Let's see, maybe that works. Let's kind of roll with that and just, kind of move on. So that's the basics of it. Really cool sound, right? It's also worth, noting here that, and it's helpful. I'm not normally a preset guy. I don't really get much. I create some presets for myself, but I don't generally go rifling through them. But with this one, just because it's such a unique piece of gear, there are some settings specifically from, Michael Brower, that are worth kind of checking out. In particular, I loaded up one just for the male vocal, which we're going to load up next. And it seemed to kind of dial in pretty quickly and also maybe give you an idea of more or less the way he uses it. He's kind of got this dialed in more than anybody would, right? So here, let's kind of take a quick look at the vocal here, right? If I start, this is
Had my first impressions that are falling out of place. Instead of shifting gears, you'd rather leap and save face. Live a life of opposites, you can't play the same game. I don't understand what's going on, but we can't get back in lane.
right. So with his preset, he's not saturating it a lot. Level, he has the manual attack here, attack time like 53 milliseconds, release time, 120, I guess. And so pretty kind of, allowing some of the dynamics and just sort of, controlling or shaping to even out a vocal. Pretty standard setting that you might find, you could work similarly with digital compressors. But with this, you're kind of getting that shaping of the sound. You could hear the presence that it brings in on the vocal.
Had my first impressions that are falling out of place. Instead of shifting gears, you'd rather leap and save face. Live a life of opposites, you can't play the same game. I don't understand.
This is on a vocal bus, so there's multiple tracks kind of running through here. Just to kind of go through quickly, here I can dial in just some of the other settings that you get to.
Had my first impressions that are falling out of place. Instead of shifting gears, you'd rather leap and save face. Live a life of opposites, you can't play the same game. I don't understand what's going on, but we can't get back in lane. Had my first impressions that are falling out of place. Instead of shifting gears, you'd rather leap and save face. Live a life of opposites, you.
So I can understand why he did that. Like some of these settings kind of, they operate a bit more in a broadcast mode where you kind of have it feels like where you have kind of multiple layers of release, one that's dealing with the initial release off of the transient and then a later stage to deal with the sustain. But they seem to be kind of slower acting, even in the numbers would suggest here. So you could understand why, that was sort of modified in to give them kind of more control to make it more usable while getting that sort of, that sizzly, I don't know if that's the right word, saturation, for the vocal, which brings in a really nice presence. And that seems to be like where he really leans into it. His first example was the Coldplay vocal. So maybe that makes perfect sense. Let's see. Let me go back here to setting A. Then we got the bass, right? This already has a lot of saturation on it, which is why I didn't drive a lot in here. But let's just kind of play around. Maybe here I have it on on a setting. Let's see. Because there's already enough saturation on there. I think that's why I didn't really drive it a whole lot. But here I could also, to kind of make this breathe a little bit more, slow down the attack a bit, go to a faster release. You hear how much energy it kind of brings in, just just the saturation component of it to add like a quite a bit more liveliness to it. One quick other thing here with the guitars. Let's see. I can drive a bit more separation here with the guitars, again, to set the bus. This might be a good place for the box tone thing to kind of come in here with the warmth control. Try to get it balanced on the output there. It seems to scoop some of the low-end energy out of the guitars a bit too much in this particular case, but let's see.
And my first impressions that are falling out of place. Instead of shifting gears, you'd rather leave than save face. Live a life of opposites, you can't play the same.
can hear how it brings just that saturation brings in a real like energy, to sounds. And I think if you kind of deal with it a bit more on a, track by track basis, you could really dial in some things and even mix in a little bit of it. Just having the wet dry control and some of the other controls with the warmth makes it really cool. And I think you're probably going to find that most of your stuff will be with the attack and release if you're kind of, not just trying to, squash a sound. But there's a lot to play with here. It's a pretty cool one for tone shaping and everything. And yeah, at least worth checking out. Pretty cool one. This kind of came up just last minute on my feed. I checked it out. I always love the stuff from Kazrog. They always do a great job. And this one is no exception. The MHB Green. This is an emulation of the AWA G7201 limiting amplifier from Australia. Definitely worth checking out. And it is plug-in of the week.